you have a different gauge. I did end up leaving that job and I did end up returning to my novel for a short period. But it was also like there were so many things that didn't make sense. And there was so much very strange information out there, especially as, COVID was hitting the world. You were really aiming for things that would pause and make you calm, you know? And so when I was listening to the Astrology Hub, I remember every time Pluto would come up, especially like the US Pluto return, I would get calm because I was like, there's a reason for this.
This podcast episode is brought to you by Astrology Hub's Inner Circle. Awaken your soul, find connection, and transform your life with the world's top astrologers in a heart-centered community.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Astrology Hub podcast. I am so excited to be here with all of you and really grateful that you've decided to tune in because today we're going to be doing one of my very favorite things, which is sharing a real life story of transformation, how astrology has actually impacted somebody's life. And that somebody today is Shelby Bach. She is an author and also a member of our Inner Circle. And she has an amazing story to tell. And I'm very, very thrilled to be sharing that with all of you so that you can find yourself in other people's stories. I feel like stories are something that are very missing from our culture at this point in time. And there's still such a core part of who we are as humans. And so just consider that we're sitting around a little campfire and we're hanging out and hearing a story. And again, I'm really glad that you've decided to join us. So Shelby, thank you so much for being willing to share your story with our community, and welcome to the Astrology Hub podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
All right. So let's start here. Can you paint a picture for us? What was your life like before astrology was a part of it?
Well, there is the thread where astrology was a part of it, like right before I personally got into it, because my best friend was very much into astrology. She had read, I think it's Linda Goodman's Love Signs in college. And so she would refer to it all the time. And she would tell me things about my astrology. And I was like, you know what? That's your thing. I think I was also kind of resisting the Virgo archetype a little bit. I did not like what I'd heard of it. And I pulled back from whenever she was saying it, and I was just kind of like, let her run and then not comment on it too much. But we did kind of start a moon circle together, and that started to open me up slightly more. And then for Christmas of 2019, she gifted me an astrology reading with her favorite astrologer. And we thought at first it was going to start out, it was going to be scheduled in March of that year, but it actually got bumped up to like January 4th. And I remember sitting and listening to him and being like, I don't know how he knows this, but I don't want, it's like there are certain things I really resonate with. There are certain things I don't want to be true, but I know this is a language and I want to understand exactly what that language is before I accept what's being told. And so the reason why she gave me that astrology reading is I was in this flux place of I had just told my dad that I was going to leave my job. I was working for my dad at the time, and I was leaving to go, return to my novel, which I had started 5 years prior. And I was like, it's time. This is the year. I'm going to do it. And then all of a sudden, astrology was like this thread in my life right as those huge conjunctions in 2020 were coming down.
And I can guess what happened at that point.
All of a sudden, I was really into all of the astrology podcasts, including the Astrology Hub podcast. It was kind of like you have a different gauge. I did end up leaving that job, and I did end up returning to my novel for a short period. But it was also like there were so many things that didn't make sense, and there was so much very strange information out there, especially as, COVID was hitting the world. You were really aiming for things that would pause and make you calm, And so when I was listening to the Astrology Hub, I remember every time Pluto would come up, especially like the US Pluto return, I would get calm because I was like, there's a reason for this. We are going through something collective. We're going through something that is really an initiation. as a community and as individuals, and it's not random. And I think that that's something that we sometimes forget, is that we are part of, the way I like to think about it now is that we're in conversation with the stars, even if we don't know that we're in conversation with the stars yet. And so when something's happening, something's blowing up in my life, or I'm making big decisions, a lot of times it's an astrology related thing. So that what I just described was that Saturn, Jupiter, Pluto conjunction up at the beginning of January of 2020. That was squaring my North Node, and Eris was right on top of my North Node at the time. And so I'm doing something very disruptive, which is leaving a job where I'm quite valued. But I'm also following what I know to be my North Star, to be something that is laying the foundation for the rest of my life. And it's one of those moments where it would have been impossible not to feel pressure. But looking back at it, and that's something that I do love to do. That's my favorite kind of astrology, is to look back and to integrate exactly what was happening right then. It's these moments of understanding, like, that was pivotal, not just because it was a significant part of my life story, but it's pivotal because the stars were telling me what to do and I was listening before I had enough astrology to read those stars.
Isn't that interesting? It's like the awareness just adds another layer of agency for us, right?
Yeah. And it's a layer of kind of like, it's kind of like I go back to that time and I see the ingredients. Like, these were the ingredients on the table. And I go back and I'm starting to go back and look at the projects that I started then, because as I said, that book was 5 years old. It's my Saturn return book, but I started something called People Are Stories in Progress, which is it's a free resource on my website, but it was intended as this bridge to demonstrate to readers of all ages, including the young ones that I serve, your life is a story. And this is how you can unpack story to understand your life, as well as how you can understand story to create the kind of stories that you admire in what I've done. And I feel like that's a very Pluto-like activity.
Yes, for sure. Like taking the raw material of someone's life and using the gold to alchemize your own story in your own life. Can we back up a sec? Because there's a couple things that you said that I want to dive a little bit before we move on to some other things. But you said that you think you had resistance to astrology because of what you were told about the Virgo archetype. I can absolutely relate. It's the same kind of thing where I'd be like, oh, really? Like, I don't know that, it wasn't necessarily something I was excited to associate myself with, everything that I would hear about it, So what was it specifically about the Virgo archetype that didn't work for you then, or that you didn't resonate with then? And what have you learned that it has? And I'm making an assumption here. Yeah. What have you learned that has made you embrace that part of yourself?
Well, okay. Well, first of all, it's really interesting though. You've named 2 earth signs.
Yes.
And I have this theory that part of the reason why we resist certain takes on earth signs is because we've gotten really disconnected from the earth as a society. And so, like, for example, what I was specifically resisting is, like, Virgos are, first of all, the sign of the Virgin. And I was like, that sounds like a terrible life sentence, but it's also kind of like, it's the Vesta of virgins, like it's the priestess archetype. And so if you don't understand, and that virgin originally meant whole.
Right.
And it didn't mean anything about, it didn't mean that you wouldn't have union. It meant that you were always whole, even if you had union.
Right. Yeah.
And so Virgo really nurtures the wholeness in all things. And at the time of the year that Virgo is actually happening, like, that's the harvest season. And so it's really the harvest priestess. And I think it was BRONWYN Simons who pointed this out to me. Virgos have a great analytical ability because they need to be able to figure out, this needs to be composted, this needs to be eaten now, this needs to be preserved. because that was their role in the society, you know? And similarly, I think with Capricorn, I've heard Rick Levine say Capricorns climb every mountain, right? I've got a Capricorn Mars. And so like, I totally relate to that. But what I've recognized is like, especially as Pluto has transversed all of Capricorn, my relationship to that Mars has completely changed because I don't ask myself what mountain to climb. Instead, I've started to think of Capricorn more like the wisdom of the grandmothers that gets you through the darkest part of winter, right? They're the people that are it's the quiet time of the year for good reason. And there's that gather around the table and do storytelling and some planning for the next year, but not quite. It is that time of community building and like holding each other.
I can see why you're an author, my dear. Your way with words is beautiful. Thank you. I just love the way you just described those things. And you know, it's interesting about your theory that our disconnect from earth signs is sort of a mirror of our disconnect from the earth itself.
Mm-hmm.
I can really relate with that very deeply because when I left New York City and I moved to Hawaii, I had like visions of grandeur about what being in nature would be like.
Yeah.
But actually moved to Hawaii, I realized how like domesticated I was. And it was kind of scary for me. Like there were things about nature that were scary and too dirty or, you know, little insects or whatever, things that I didn't want to be with. But the more that the closer I got to earth, the closer I got to myself. So that's why I'm saying, I think what you're saying is true, that there is this part of ourselves that is represented by the earth that we absolutely have a disconnect from. And the more and I think it can work both ways. The more we get close to ourselves, the more we want to be close to the earth. And the more we get close to the earth, the more we feel close to ourselves. So it works both ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I also like, I was never like totally afraid of nature. I did spend some time out camping by myself when I was like one time camping out by myself. So I felt that affinity with nature. But I had a period right before I got into astrology that really laid this foundation of me feeling like I was in communion with nature. And astrology really feels like an extension of that. Because the same way the moon moves the tides, the moon also moves us. And even though the other planets are farther out, we feel that as well. And it may be more subtle and we may not always get the interpretation correct the first time, right? But that doesn't mean that we can't refine those feelings, refine those and change towards what we want to see more of. And so you were in Hawaii and I was romping around my neighborhood and enjoying like the what was right next to me. You can have both experiences.
Okay. So let's actually do the next part. So, okay. You're in 2020.
Yeah.
And astrology, you finally got over your resistance. You had the reading. You were like, I resonate with some of this, but I'm not so sure about other parts. What happened to get you to a point where you were like, but I think there's something here to this astrology thing and I'm gonna tune in regularly. Like what was happening for you that made it all of a sudden? I mean, I know 2020 was happening.
2020 was happening.
So how did that shift happen in you?
I had more free time because I left my job. That helped. And I needed to be outside. And so I was going on long walks. And so I had all of a sudden more time for podcasts, right? I had a friend pass away. And so I was very much grief stricken. And she was one of the first people I knew that passed away from COVID. And so another very big Pluto thing. But it was also this moment of me trying to make sense of the world, right? And not having the tools that I relied on before.
Right.
And that includes like later in the year, I lost fiction. And fiction had been my great like alchemist of all my emotions. And all of a sudden, like, it happened on you know how there's a retrograde where it's the forward motion and the backward motion and the forward motion, the backward motion of Pluto going back over that nodal square.
Yeah.
That was when I lost fiction for a while. I got it back. So I'm still writing that same novel and I wrote today. Want to make sure that that's clear. But
you lost fiction meaning like you weren't inspired, you lost your muse? Like, what does that mean?
no, I just stopped writing and I also stopped reading fiction.
Oh, wow.
So it was very much like fiction was all, and that opened up a lot of time as well. But it was almost like my plates had been cleared. And so all of a sudden I was spending a lot more time in nature, a lot more time writing about creativity. I changed my definition of creativity. It used to be being creative is to make something, like make something you could hold and see, right?
Yeah.
Now I find creativity as the practice of making meaning.
Jeez, chills.
And you don't need to have like, the story like it's a fiction. If you're making meaning of your own life, that is also being creative. And because I'd lost fiction, it was very much like because those decks had been cleared, all of a sudden I had way more time to listen to Rick Levine talk about the month ahead for like an hour and a half or whatever, however long he goes, and he teaches you so much.
Okay.
So I remember like hearing him talk about a square, and I have squares in my chart, and I was like, oh my gosh, his definition, instead of it being a combative thing, he talks about how, it's the same way you look when you're rising out of a chair. That's something where you're taking action.
Yeah.
And I remember that moment, and I was like, I have to write that down because all of a sudden it changed my experience of my chart.
That's another chill moment for me, because what you just described is what understanding does. When we understand ourselves, when we understand our chart, understanding our chart is really understanding ourselves, right?
Right.
We get to experience more and more layers of ourselves. And
yeah,
that shift in perception of, oh, it doesn't mean conflict and all bad things.
right.
It actually means like that sort of tension that creates action. Oh, okay, I can take that and I can actually use it that way.
Right.
It's that awareness that enables you to make a different kind of choice.
Right.
We're a victim to the other level of awareness, but the other level of awareness just gave you a ceiling. And when we just increase our perception, it's like, oh, there's more possibilities for how you can choose to work with the different things that are coming up in your life.
Right. It's like, it's incomplete. It feels incomplete to you. Like when you're studying astrology or you're hearing something about astrology and you're resistant to it.
Yeah.
Probably because it's incomplete.
Ooh, yes.
And you have no one is going to understand your chart as in your life astrologically better than you. Although all astrologers are going to be able to give you one piece that helps you come to your own completion.
Mm.
And that's something that I've always loved. And so for example, I remember feeling a little bit weird when I found out that Pluto was in my 10th house. And I was like, but I'm not really a dark and depressing person. And I don't think that people think of me that way. However, it's sextile my sun. And so what that means is the same definition of the Virgo wholeness, right? Pluto themes, I always tend to bring wholeness to Pluto themes, often in public arenas such as this podcast, right?
Wow.
But that was not something anybody told me. It was something where I heard enough about Pluto and I started to see how Pluto had been showing up in my life. And those were some of the best stories I learned how to tell.
Oh.
It just all came back in full circle. And so that's something where someone's reflecting that to you strongly. And because it sings to you in that way, there's more there. And then it just starts showing up more and more and more. And that's what I love about studying astrology.
What's been the single most impactful thing you've done as an astrology student to you've mentioned listening to podcasts. What have been some other things that you tapped into or tuned into that have really helped you cultivate your level of awareness?
Well, I can talk to kind of there's two kind of layers to it. There's kind of you hear something on a podcast and then you do it. And then there's that level of usefulness, but then you add some classes to it. And then all of a sudden you go even deeper. And so I remember in 2020, listening to Anne's weekly weather, she mentioned her pinball method, right? Where you put all of your planets in order by degree and you see what it speaks to you in your life. And I remember doing that and having these huge revelations. But then like this past month, I did Planet Square the Nodes, which is a class in the academy with MOSHE, WOLFE. And that was when I realized that Pluto had squared my nodes during that period. And then earlier this week, I did the same thing with Pluto in Capricorn, where I looked at that list of the PINBALL method and then tracked exactly what happened on like when Pluto aspected my Neptune, which is my youngest planet, when Pluto aspect my Mercury, which is my oldest planet. And I made that story. And so I don't know if I can answer what's the single thing. I can only answer that there's a practice of this study and revelation that kind of has exploded in my life, where it's all of a sudden there's these moments of, I understand what to look for. And when I do something, I always find some sort of treasure, some sort of there's like some sort of shining thread that gets uncovered.
Amazing. Okay, Shelby, you just mentioned the word practice.
Yeah.
I would love to explore or discover some of the things that you do. Like, how do you make astrology a practice? You've mentioned taking some courses, which is awesome, and then following the threads. Do you find that you participate with astrology in a ceremonial way, with any ritual? You're a Virgo, so my guess would be yes, you love to do this sort of ritual kinds of thing. And if so, how? Like, what are some of your favorite things to do to make it a practice?
I do track the moons, like I think it's called lunar shadows, that where it's the 4, do the new moon, the quarter moon, the full moon, and the last quarter moon, where it's that 2.5-year cycle. And I go back and I track, what did I do on that date? So for example, for most like Taurus new moons, I usually plant some sort of seeds. And that's a practice. But what I really do is I look up what the astrology is going to be. So for example, the Mars retrograde that we had this past winter, that was right over my moon stellium. And my moon stellium includes my Chiron. And it aspects like, I've got a grand mutable cross, all that was thrown up. And so what I did is I tracked what those dates were. And I made sure that there was room for me on those dates to be really, really gentle with myself. And to, I would pull cards on those days. I made a list of all the aspects that were going to happen. I pulled cards like this, and I made it something where it was a self-tending practice, and not just like, I'm waiting for myself to get hit by this like sad stick. And that's been very helpful, because what it did is it made it so instead of me feeling like I'm getting a beating from a transit, I'm in conversation with this transit. Things are coming up. They're important. And what I also did is I made room for taking more classes so that I understood it better. And what was beautiful is that there was always something really juicy in the academy where I was learning something directly related to something that was going on now. So like Bronwyn Simon's lunar phases, I remember was really helpful during that time, because of course it's my Gemini moon and she's giving me a new way to like deal with my beautiful Gemini moon.
How has all of this helped you become a better human? Like better in your relationships, better to yourself, better in your work? How do you see it showing up like in practical, tangible ways in your life?
I'm really anchored in knowing this is my path and not somebody else's path. So I go back and I look at that period of that Pluto square my nodes and know that Eris was on my North Node. It was a really sad, disruptive time for a lot of people. And I was trying to find a balance of being really soothing to people. And also, Eris is known as the goddess of strife, but she's also like, the way I think of her is the goddess of disharmony who brings more harmony. And so I was doing things that were disruptive, especially to my family. So like, for example, I was digging into all of our personal ancestry. And so I was able to bring up racial incidents. I was able to bring up the fact that two of my grandmother's parents were second cousins and why. And I was able to like dive deep into it in a way where it's anchored me to know where I come from, but also to recognize like I am the changer of these stories. I am the person who inherits this and changes it. And instead of me questioning like, oh, should I do something nice? Because I've got a Libra South Node, right? Should I conjunct my Venus actually? As like, should I keep being the nice person? It's like, actually, I am being the nice person. It's just I'm inventing a new sort of nice.
So good. I love what you said, that you have this awareness now or understanding that your path is your own.
Mm-hmm.
At least in my experience, and I don't know if this is true for you, but in understanding that, so much of the, oh, well, they should do this, or it should be this way, or the judgment around why everyone doesn't see it the certain way, all that just dissipates because astrology shows us that they won't see it exactly the way you see it or have the path you have by design. It's actually the way it's meant. It's designed to be by nature itself. So trying to like get everybody to be the same and think the same and act the same and all that, first of all, it's never going to work. And second of all, there doesn't need to be judgment around that. Actually, that is to be celebrated because it's how it's meant to be.
Right.
So, and with that comes compassion and understanding. And to me, even though it could seem like it would be dividing in some way, because it's recognizing differences, it's actually unifying. Because it's like, oh, well, of course we're seeing this different way. Like, let me understand the way you're seeing it instead of judging you and expecting you to see it my way.
Right.
Yeah.
And I started writing about this around the same period, but I started calling that perspective that a person has, their foundational lens.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like every person has a foundational lens in their chart. And when you see that foundational lens, whether it's an astrologer or someone else, and I'm similar with writing, where like I remember walking into writing classes and being like, that's your lens. That doesn't have to do with like what I want. So like if I love fantasy fiction and you don't like fantasy fiction, of course you're not going to like my stuff. It's like, but there are some people that really will. And it's more about finding your groove and also finding the groove of the people that kind of resonate with you, and also not expecting it to be, all the Sagittariuses are the same. I've got a ton of like, my parents have the same birthday. My ascendant is on that degree. We do have a lot of similarities, but the rest of our chart is like a mess in comparison. And so we do have these like friction moments, but it's also this beautiful celebration of, it's like we're growing partners in that. It's like we're different enough that we kind of push each other a little bit, and we're similar enough where it's like, we can decide that we're all intact as we are. And by growing in this way, we can really expand into this next collaboration as a family. It's teamwork, right? And to see each other as whole in our charts is extremely powerful. So for example, my Saturn, my dad and I kind of were contentious when I was growing up, right? His Mercury is on my Saturn, but his sun is on my ascendant. And so there's a lot of times where I'm like, he says something and I don't like it. And then I see what he does that's not exactly what he said. And I said, okay, I'm going to lean into what you did and who you are rather than what you said. And that sort of understanding, that sort of way of approaching people in astrology, that really brings us into this next level of what's our role here and how can we grow together inside a family as individuals and also as like bigger communities, What's your lane, right?
Yeah. What's your family? How do they feel about astrology? Is it something you discuss, or is it just
My sister enjoys hearing when I tell her about it. So I've talked to her. She's got a Taurus moon. So I tell her a few things about like, this is how an earth sign would react to this. My parents are like puzzled by it. My brother's kind of like, what are you doing? It's like, this seems to be important to you, but I'm going to do my face, because he does do his face. But my best friend enjoys it because she's like, she got me into the astrology. And so all of a sudden I'll be like, oh yeah, you're having this transit. Or sometimes it's like, we're having this transit because we were born only 3 months apart. And so it's kind of like, it's hitting our Chiron here. So we're just going to like chill for a moment. And she's like, oh, okay.
Love it. I love it. So what made you decide to join the inner circle, and what's your favorite part about being in our inner circle community?
I was joining when the Tarnases were giving their talk. I think you only opened it for like 3 days.
Your astrological initiation?
Right.
Okay.
And so at that time I was like, wow, this is really cool. And it was almost like it wasn't enough anymore just to listen to the podcast. It was like I'd taken a couple of the academy courses. And I had really enjoyed them and gotten a lot out of them. But I knew like I was ready to have more conversations about this. I also understood like what's beautiful about the inner circle is like there's so many astrological minds gathered in one place. And a lot of them are, the luminaries we studied from, and on a monthly basis, the monthly mentors. But what's also cool is like, these are people that also know their charts super duper well. And so you're meeting people that, you're having in-depth Chiron conversations. Like I've got a Chiron moon stellium and someone else is like, oh man, mine's opposite. And so you're like getting really deep into this like very, very, unique aspect without feeling like you're alone in it. It's like you are communing with someone at a level where you guys are meeting on common ground. And it's beautiful to be inside that community, especially in like the new moon calls, for example, where it's kind of like, it's a moment in time. We're celebrating it together.
What are you've mentioned the community, you mentioned the new moon calls. What are the resources that you get the most out of?
I think I really love the classes, not just the part where you're taking the class, but the way that you're seeing other people's questions at the same time. It's kind of like, we've just gone over Eris and Haumea, Maki and Pluto, and all of a sudden, it's not just my knowledge that's spiked, but everybody's knowledge is spiked. And so we're exchanging all of these stories around these big, very new celestial entities, right? And it's that feeling of being a field researcher among other field researchers when it comes to astrology, where you feel like you're exchanging notes on something that's very, very new and contributing to this reunion between people and the stars, which we used to have. Like back in Shakespeare's day, when he named the star-crossed lovers, he was talking about astrology. Everybody knew what that was. And I feel like we're getting back to it. Maybe it's just my circle, but I feel like we're getting back to it, or at least we're kind of like the forebears of getting back to that.
Yeah, it's hard to tell, but right. I love what you're describing, because this was one of the things when we looked at creating the inner circle. Is like, first of all, most people feel pretty alone in speaking the language. They don't have a ton of people around them where they can be like, I'm in a Pluto square by nodes. Like, yeah. Has anybody else been there? How did you deal with it? So that alone can be so reassuring, right?
Right.
But then what you're talking about in terms of being able to share information and really learn from each other's experiences, technology is enabling this. This didn't exist like not even that long ago.
Right.
And so what you're talking about, being field researchers among field researchers, it helps us have a different understanding of these archetypes, of these aspects of transits and how they can show up in our lives far beyond the few examples you get from a book, for example.
Right.
That's
Right.
one astrologer's lens. That's
Right.
one astrologer's understanding. It couldn't possibly contain the breadth of what might be possible in a specific transit, for example, Pluto transit.
Right.
So it just opens up so much for us to, again, have that agency and how we want to work with these energies as they come up in our lives.
Yeah. And to bring it back to what we were talking about earlier, when you feel like something's incomplete, it may be incomplete. And it may also be incomplete for everyone because it's something that's so new, especially since Pluto was discovered in 1930. If something that you hear about Pluto doesn't resonate, maybe it's because you're the person that's bringing it into focus. And same with Eris and the other in Chiron, 1970, right? It's like these were not discovered recently. And it's almost like we're inheriting those single astrologers from the books, right? And a lot of them that you're bringing into as the teachers, right? Mm-hmm. And we get to circle around and say, well, this is my actual experience. And so we redefine and expand the definition by defining it for ourselves.
Oh, yes. And what you brought, what's the name of your, what was it? Stories that like unfolding.
Well, people are in stories in progress.
Yes. People are stories in progress. Well, so are planets.
Right.
So when they get frozen in time as like, this is the only archetypal expression of this energy, it's really, and I've asked this question to so many astrologers because I'm really curious about this. And most of them agree with this perspective that they evolve as our consciousness evolves and vice versa. That we're in this dance with them. And by expanding our awareness of what's possible within ourselves, we're also expanding the definition of what that planetary archetype holds. And that the interpretations are limited by the consciousness level of the people of the time.
Yeah. And also that, you've got to be aware we've only seen Eris and Aries, for example.
Right.
What we feel like in Taurus. We've only seen Pluto in like half the signs at this point, right? Because it's got a 200 some year orbit. And so it's like, if we decide that we're co-creating with the planet, it'll give us a new language. It'll give us a new story to tell. But it's not like, it's not just a surrender, it's a collaboration. And I think that that's something that other generations possibly didn't have the resources for. Because didn't Rick Levine also say like the astrology used to be used basically to, there were the court astrologers.
Yeah.
And they were asked to do, is it safe to get married or is it safe to take the supper? Is it safe to go to war? What are the good times for that?
Right.
That was really those are only like a few questions to be asking astrology. And now we're asking astrology, who am I? What's my purpose in the world? How can I best achieve fulfillment as a soul in this life?
Yeah. The psychological orientation around astrology is relatively new. I mean, super new, but so I think that, it's a great point, and it makes it super exciting to be a part. Like, as you said, we're on the forefront of like discoveries together.
Right.
And who knows?
Field research.
What's that?
Field research.
Yes. Field research. And who knows what we'll do with this information and how it will serve future generations and how it will serve to evolve astrology as a field itself.
Right.
So Shelby, I'm super grateful for your time, for your energy, for your story. It's been so much fun for me to connect with you. As I was telling you before we went live, like, this is one of my favorite things because I'm sharing my story quite a bit, and we're often, sharing our own information, but I love connecting with the community and hearing your stories, and just, it all comes to life on a whole nother level. So I hope all of you also have benefited from Shelby's story. Shelby, you are an inspiration. Thank you so much for, again, just living your life and sharing and being in your lane, as you said. And for any of you out there who are like, oh, wow, I feel what Shelby's saying, and I'd love to take it beyond the things I've been doing on my own, listening to podcasts or taking things on your own, the Inner Circle is open right now. You can join us right now. The other option is to get on the wait list and wait for a promotional period. Like Shelby was talking about, that 3-day promotional period we did where she jumped in. So if you're just eager to jump in now, you can at the Inner Circle's regular price. If you are like, I'd like to wait for a promotional period, you can get on the wait list. So the way that you do either one of those things, you can go to astrologyhub.com/IC23 if you're like, I want to jump in now. If you jump in now and we do have a promo period, you will have the opportunity to adjust your monthly pricing when we do that. So that's one way you can do it. Second way is to get on the wait list, and that is at astrologyhub.com/inner circle waitlist. astrologyhub.com/inner circle waitlist. You'll be the first to know when we do open up a promo period, and we'd love to have you. It's a great community, great people like Shelby. So we would love to have a chance to be on the forefront and be field researchers together. Shelby, anything else you want to leave us with in closing?
Yeah, I just want to say, like, thank you so much, because you've really gathered a great crew of, you've got a great team, but you've also gathered a great community. And it's a really lovely place to kind of hold other people's hands and have your own hand held when you're going through one of these big transits, to know that you're not alone when you're going through one of the gnarly moments. You can be seen, and also other people can help you understand your own experience too. So thank you for that.
God, Shelby, when creating Astrology Hub, I often had the vision of just like holding out a hand and helping people through all these different things that we go through. So to hear you say that that's happening within the community, that's not, that doesn't stop with me extending a hand, that you're extending hands to each other. That's even better. It's amazing. So thank you for that reflection. And again, thank you for being here on the podcast.
Thank you.
All of you for listening in, for being a part of our community, for living your life with astrology as a part of it. And I can't wait to connect with you on the next episode. Would love to hear too. Do you like these stories of transformation? We decided after airing some of these a few months ago that we would love to continue the series, 1 or 2 a month, and just, keep the storytelling going. So let us know how you like it. Also, we'll put the links to any of the Academy courses that Shelby mentioned today that some of you might want to tune into. We'll put those in the show notes so that you can do that easily. All right, everybody. Take care, and we will see you soon.